Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Lady Cao Feng, and we're here for a special Iron Triangle edition of Wuxia Weekend, where we're covering films that are directed by Chang Cheh and star T. Lung and David Chang. We have a list of 5 movies we're going to talk about, and before we get into that, though, we just want to have a general discussion about Iron Triangle films. And you were talking before about how there's some dispute over the proper, like what constitutes an Iron Triangle movie, and so I want to give you the floor to sort of talk about that before we get into the films themselves.
Okay, well, the biggest dispute is who has to be in it and how many are in it. But the Iron Triangle is Chang Cheh as the director, David Chang as a star, and T. Lung is a star. But then there's the debate about ensemble casts. Movies like The Shaolin Temple, where there are other stars like Alexander Fusheng and Chun are also in it, and they have major roles. So would that be considered an Iron Triangle movie? To me, in my opinion, it would not be, because it's an all-star ensemble cast. And one of our movies that we're going to do kind of borders on this. So we'll have to let people decide on if they consider it an Iron Triangle movie or not. But to me, it's just the 3 of them are the principals, and everybody else is kind of floating around them. They're the stars, and they're the integral part of the movie.
And I would say for me, mine's similar. I would say I generally think in terms of the chemistry. Like if they have an opportunity and chance for David Chang and T. Lung have great chemistry on screen, and if that's able to become apparent in the movie, then to me it feels like an Iron Triangle movie. If it's a movie where it gets lost because of the ensemble and stuff, that's when it would not. But like Lady Cao Feng said, we kind of allowed for movies on this list that might be on the line, so that we can get into some of these questions. What I guess what and before we go in, I just want what is it that you like in particular about Iron Triangle movies? Because you and I have covered a lot of them on the podcast, and there were some that we simply didn't do here because we've already covered them. But what's your what do you find appealing about them?
I like the chemistry of the three men and what they put on the screen. I like David Chiang and T. Lung's chemistry and how they bounce off of each other. You can see that there's some kind of relationship there that's beyond what you see on the screen. And I love the way that Chang Cheh is able to direct them to get what he needs out of them for feeling, and to be able to make the movie very personal, and in some cases for me very emotional. There have been some movies where I've actually cried at certain scenes, and we're going to do one of those movies.
They are very emotional. I think they do a good job with that in these films. And I also like the contrast between them. They kind of it's a really odd comparison, but they have like a Laurel and Hardy type sort of, they look so different from each other, and they have such a different demeanor from each other that it just really works. And David Chang is he's got I don't know, sort of like a rebellious sort of rebel without a cause flair to him, and T. Lung is more the sort of brave hero in a lot of the films. And I don't know, it's just a really great combination.
I agree. I think T. Lung is also a little bit more intense and serious, where David Chiang is more laid back and kind of quiet and not invisible, but he has a presence on the screen, but it's not as domineering as it could be. I have a feeling that he could dominate a scene, but he doesn't, because that's not the type of person he is. So, he's the cool, kind of, like you said, rebel without well, most of the time he is a rebel with a cause in these films,
Mm.
though. But he is the rebellious type. But he's cool and
Yeah.
easy, and T Lung is intense and fierce and brave and tall and just what you see out in the front. But
Yeah.
David Chang holds his own, and you need that balance. Both male leads can't be overpowering and dominant. So I think that's what makes them work so well together.
All right. So the first movie we're going to talk about is Vengeance, and this is a 1970 film. It's got action choreography by Tong Kai. Obviously, it stars David Chang and T Lung, and it's got kind of a Peking opera sort of theme running throughout it. And it's set in 1925. And the basic premise is T Lung is this Peking opera performer who ends up being brutally killed because there's a situation involving a marshal and some local criminals who, set their sights on his wife. And after his death, David Chang's character rolls in and tries to get vengeance. There's also a love story in the mix, and it gets it has a pretty extravagant ending, I would say. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on this movie, Lady Cao Feng?
I I love this movie. I love the sneak peek into the world of Peking opera and the local thugs. I like the mix of the kung fu, and there's some street fighting. It's almost like gang fighting in a way, and there's some gun action in it. I love the flashing of the opera flashbacks in the midst of everything that's going on. They keep T Lung's character in the foreground by weaving in these flashbacks of him in his death scene in the opera throughout the movie, so that you're reminded of why David Chang's character is actually on this ravenous rampage of revenge. And I think that those are very important, because if they weren't in there, then T Lung's appearance would almost seem like a cameo to
Mm.
some people. So I think that's really important. And I really like the love story between David Chang's character and the actress is Wang Ping. I like her a lot. She appears in another movie we're going to talk about too. But I think they have a really sweet chemistry on scene together.
And I think that the the whole look of the film in general is just really beautiful. The like you said, the Peking opera stuff, and there's a lot of really stylish scenes throughout. The opening sequence is very memorable, and I also think, like you said, T Lung, he dies early on in the movie, and we're going to be spoiling all of the plot content here, just so people know. I'm assuming most people that are listening have probably seen these movies, but the death scene is really memorable because of the way he dies, and like you said, the way that they cut in those Peking opera scenes, and it's really gruesome too. It's a particularly violent
Oh
death.
yeah.
And the movie's violent. And we're gonna cover this a lot because Chang Cheh, his movies are violent, and the Iron Triangle movies seem to be a particular kind of violence. In this one, I think also in the film The Duel, and particularly in the movie The Savage Five, we'll get this too. But there's a grittiness to the violence, and there's a sense. And again, it's not like we were talking about this before. It's not like there's like a clear message like to the audience. It's not like everything's wrapped up in a package, but there's a complicated world that the characters are in, that where the violence has consequences. And I think you see it really well in the final scene, where you have the woman in the foreground weeping, and David Chang in that sort of on the staircase with all the just all the dead bodies. It's very it's able to say a lot without really getting too terribly specific about it. And also in that scene, you have the the tactic that he uses of playing possum in order to get the bad guy, which I thought was kind of an interesting way to way to do it. Because there's that moment where David Chang is faking dead, and just the look on his face is perfect for the scene. And yeah, so I don't know, any other thoughts on this movie?
Yeah, I like the way that Chang Cheh has a way of weaving in familiar faces in his movies. The way that he has people, they're not stars yet, but you will see them as stars later down the line in movies. In this movie, we see Chen Quan Tai. He's so young, and Jason Pai Piao is also in it, and Fong Hak Ong is in it, and Bruce Tong Yim Chan are all they're extras in this movie, but years later they become stars in their own right and end up in more of his movies. He has a knack, Chang Cheh, for taking people from the beginning to big stardom and then just molding them in such a way that they're memorable, and they appear in all these little movies. And it's funny if you watch them like I did, like completely out of order. And I started with 80s movies and went backwards, and I'm seeing these people that have been stars, like, you know, Chen Quan Tai was a big star later, but I'm seeing him fresh faced in this movie, and you're like, oh, that's so and so, and that's so and so, and you can pick them out in their early roles, and I think that's really cool to see, and that's why I like to watch these movies over and over again, because I always notice somebody different.
Well, and he gets seduced by Wang Ping and stabbed in the neck, right? That's his
yes,
that's his little moment. That one I caught. I actually didn't catch Jason Pipiao in this and the other ones. I missed them, but him, that stood out to me. He was very because he had like an actual interaction. Sometimes you just see like a familiar face and they're just getting stabbed or something.
I've seen this movie 6 times.
Well, I find that I often miss details even after a number of watches.
Yeah, me too. I'm sure there are other people that are in there that I haven't caught yet.
But anyways, but yeah. So I don't know. I think this is like again, it's a really cool film, and it's interesting because like we've said, they don't really actually share a scene together except for that flashback sequence, because they're brothers that both do Peking opera basically, and we get like a brief moment that I think doesn't even really have them talking. It's just kind of like a memory. No. But somehow the chemistry still kind of is there. Do you know what I mean? Even so, yes. That's interesting to me. And so, and again, the Peking opera stuff is really, really cool in this. It really has an added effect to the movie. All right, so our next movie is The New One-Armed Swordsman. This is a 1971 release, obviously directed by Chang Cheh and with action direction by Tong Kai and Lau Kar Lung. This one is... you described it as a reimagining of the One-Armed Swordsman, which I think is the best way to describe it. You know, we've talked about the One-Armed Swordsman before, and that's a very good movie. But here, David Chang is in the role. It's a different character, and he arrives. He becomes a one-armed swordsman through very different circumstances than the original One-Armed Swordsman movie. In this one, Ku Feng plays the villain, and he's basically this guy who he persuades people to maim themselves and leave the martial world. This seems to be a thing of his.
It's a pattern.
He doesn't like competitors, and so as soon as a new threat emerges in the martial world, he tricks them so that they're going to have to retire and not be a threat to him anymore. And by doing this, he is able to position himself as a good guy. And so the basic thing that happens is he ends up in a situation where he has to have a duel with Ku Feng, and he promises to cut off one of his arms if he loses. He loses, and he has to cut off his arm, and he retires from the martial world. And then about a year later, the Ti Lung character arrives and is sort of the new guy who's emerging in the martial world. And so the heart of the movie is really sort of the the brotherhood that emerges between these two characters. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the thing that I find most memorable about the film. That and Ti Lung's death sequence in the Tiger Fortress. So, what did you think of this movie in general?
I like the movie. I like how Chang Cheh can rework his stories and produce something new but similar. You recognize some of the points from the original, but he completely changes things. I really liked this story because of Ku Feng. You think is going to be this wonderful, righteous man who stands up for the little guy and tries to protect all the financial interests and in the area and keep everybody on the straight and narrow. But here he is goading people into little duels, and if they lose, they have to maim themselves and retire. And it doesn't really become apparent at first because you think because David Chiang's character is the new hotshot on the scene that he's just arrogant and, full of himself, and Ku Feng is the one who's just going to take him down. But somewhere in the movie, things change, and you realize, Ku Feng is not the righteous man he pretends to be. And I really enjoyed that little twist in the movie. I also liked Li Ching also stars in the movie with them, and she's just simple and sweet, and she wants David Chang's character just to protect himself and wield a sword, and she has no idea that he was a top swordsman. And I loved how in this movie that he never lost his ability to be a top swordsman. Like remember in the original with Jimmy Wang Yu, he cut off his arm that wielded the sword, so he had to learn all over again. In this one, he didn't have to learn. He just kept everything in his brain and was able to wield a sword and take care of business when he needed to. And
it was more of a mental block. Like it was a mental hurdle for him where he didn't want to get back into it. And you mentioned the love interest. One of the things I found interesting about this one versus the original is in the original, the love interest who was Lisa Chow, who kind of had chemistry with Jimmy Wang Yu in prior films. In that movie, she was sort of trying to move him away from the martial world. She was trying to steer him towards peace. And in this one, she's fully embracing that aspect of him to possibly to his detriment. But it's an interesting difference in the characters. The thing that I really like about there's a lot of things I like about this one. I think it's a really a lot of times when a series goes on or when they're working with the same idea over and over again, it gets dry. This feels really reinvigorated by number one, the chemistry of David Chang and Ti Lung, but also there are things that he does differently they're kind of improvements. Like the one-armed swordsman in this movie, his big thing is he wields two swords at the start of the movie. And so when he loses his arm, it's like the loss is so much more tremendous. Do you know what I mean? Because he has this really magnificent twin sword style, and he can't really apply that anymore. His style is going to have to change, obviously. And so I feel that was it was a cool way of making the audience really experience the loss when it happens. And also, I don't know if this was deliberate or not, but the original movie is obviously based on Return of Condor Heroes, or at least something that happens in Return to Condor Heroes to the main character, and there are traces of it in the original film. And in this one, I noticed that Ti Lung's character was sleeping on a rope between two trees, and that's something that the Zhao Long New character does in Return of Condor Heroes. So I was curious if that was a direct call to the source material or if it was just a coincidence. But I thought it was an interesting little detail. There was also a mention of the sword that he ends up getting was from some great master, and I think they said it was Master Dugu or Dagu in this version. And in Return of Condor Heroes, there is a Master Dugu who who the main hero inherits his sword from. And so I again, it might be coincidental because of the nature of subs and dubs, but I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, I think it's a great movie, and I think the scene that we have to absolutely talk about, because obviously violence is going to be a theme here, is it's not just a death, it's a bisection. Like the way they kill Ti Lung is so I never get used to it. I'm always horrified every time I see it.
You talk about it because it disturbs me.
It's disturbing. It's a very I'll tell you why it's disturbing. It's disturbing because when you take a person, as recognizable as Ti Lung, and you make them unrecognizable by destroying their body in that way, it's just like a reminder of like mortality, and it's very disturbing to watch. It reminds me, I think I could be getting my movies confused, but I think in the heroic ones there was a drawn quartering scene. It reminds me a lot of that. It's that kind of thing where, I'm not just going to kill the hero and you're going to see the expression on his face. The hero is going to his body is going to be destroyed in a really outrageous way, so that when he's on the floor he won't even be recognizable as what he was. And it's so disturbing that the villain's even cancel my appointments. I'm done for the day. He like, you can tell, like, the Gu Feng character is really nefarious and kind of over the top evil, but even that takes the wind out of his sails when it happens. So I think it just for that alone, that's I think it's impossible not to have a reaction to that scene. I think if you're sincere when you're watching the movie, if you're not guarding your reactions, and again, it gets us into sort of the violence thing, which is that's just sort of how things are in a Chang Cheh film. But this was, I thought, even for a Chang Cheh movie, that was
pretty graphic and pretty disturbing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. But I think it also does add this, when David Chang goes to get revenge in the end, it adds a lot to it. You sort of are imagining what happened to poor Ti Lung, who was a really vibrant character up to that point. I think that's one of the things that's so disturbing about it, is how vibrant he is as a character, and then to have that happen. So yeah, and then there's that wonderful scene on the bridge, the showdown between Gu Feng and David Chang. That I think it's a little bit over the top in the so the solution to, because basically the way that Gu Feng was able to defeat both of them, because they both have a twin sword style, is he sort of hits both the swords with his 3-section staff, and then I think he pulls his staff apart and strikes them in the chest, and Ti Lung comments, "If I had 3 swords, I could overcome you." And throughout the movie, we see all these scenes of David Chang juggling things, and juggling bowls and various items, and he basically uses that so that he can use 3 swords against Gu Feng in the final scene. And it's one of the it's sort of one of the things that I like about these movies, where there's a problem presented in the form of a technique that a bad guy uses, and the character has to think of a way around it, and it's usually sort of like a smart, clever way to get around the technique through a tactic.
Right.
And sometimes it's not something that would probably happen in real life, but it doesn't matter, because it's just kind of cool that, okay, he throws these 3 swords up in the air, and then he's able to defeat the technique.
Yeah, and with the disability in this movie, I never felt like that, it was not real. It's in some movies, when someone has to play that they only have one arm, that they're trying really hard to hold that arm next to them, or it's taped to them or tied to them in some way. But in this movie, I never got that sense that he was, trying not to use the arm. It just looked so natural and so real that he played that part so well, I thought.
Yeah, no, and I thought they dealt well too with the loss of the arm as the character, like the because he immediately in the next scene, the way they elapse time is really cool. His hand gets pinned to a tree with a sword, and they pan the camera. When they come back to it, it's skeletal. Then you know that time has passed. And then we find him at an inn, and he's a waiter at this inn, and he's obviously still mourning the loss of his arm and the loss of his standing in the martial world, and those two things are kind of tied together, and I like the way they deal with it. It's a very different trajectory than the original One-Armed Swordsman too. So you can see the original One-Armed Swordsman, and you really won't have any idea what to expect in this one. It's not like he just repeats the storylines, or I mean obviously, in order for it to be a One-Armed Swordsman movie, certain things have to be present, but it's not it's not predictable as if you've seen the previous ones. Okay, so the next movie is Deadly Duo, a 1971 film. This has action choreography from Tong Kai and Lau Kar Lung, and this one is a period piece. It's set during the Song Dynasty, and it's about a prince who's being held prisoner in a secure location by the Mongols, and Ti Lung is sent to rescue him. He's looking for a special man who's can cross a dilapidated bridge that is connecting to the prison, and so it's basically a movie where Ti Lung goes and has to recruit this special man, and it turns out that the man is working with the Mongols, so he ends up working with the David Chang character, who is the man's classmate, and was sent by his teacher to make sure that the guy wasn't up to no good. And so this one, I think the most memorable thing in this movie is the ending. It's got that scene at the end where David Chang just takes a ton of arrows. They go to rescue the prince, and David Chang gets wounded, and he's dying the whole time. He's losing massive amounts of blood, and the bad guy is just kind of waiting for him to lose enough blood so that he can act. And so we get this really great final battle on the shore at the pier when the prince is being brought onto a boat, and David Chang just takes so many arrows in his fighting to the last stand, and it's a very kind of, I don't know, it's kind of got like a Golden Swallow type quality to it in that respect. But what did you think of this movie?
I really like this movie. Out of the 5 movies that we watched, this was the only one that didn't involve some kind of love triangle or love interest or some kind of romance. But I generally like the brotherhood kind of movies. I loved that. Again, you see more of the familiar faces are popping up in this movie, but I love that. I love brotherhood movies because it's 2 male characters bonding. They weren't friends at the beginning of the movie. Ti Lung and David Chang, they became friends with a common goal and to rescue the prince. And once they did, it was I don't know, magnificent death at the end, more of a heroic, magnificent death. It's magnificent in the fact that he takes all these arrows standing on the bridge. And yes, there's another bridge scene in this movie. We do 3 movies have some kind of bridge scene in it.
Well, bridges
did you notice
great.
that?
Yeah, but bridges are great for confrontation.
Fight scenes, yeah. So yeah, it was really good movie.
And it's got like a real kind of, I mean, I know like some of the action stuff is kind of new, but some of it feels like very classic too. Like the it's got kind of like a like the late 60s Shaw Brothers vibe to it in places. And I thought that was kind of interesting because it comes after Vengeance. But yeah, I thought the fight scenes were good, and I like the conceit, the central conceit of needing a guy with like the good lightness technique to get across the bridge is a cool idea. It's like an interesting adventure for the character to go on. So yeah, I was I thought this was a good one too. And again, it's another period piece, which is I generally like period pieces, so So it's always good to see those.
Yeah, period pieces generally are my favorite, and I tend to gravitate to them more than the more, I guess you would say, more modern films with, when they start to involve guns and things. So, but yeah, I really like this one.
And all right, so the next movie is The Duel, and this is a 1971 film, action direction by Tong Kai and Yuan Chungyan. This movie is basically about rival schools. The main characters are Ti Lung is the son of the owner of. I mean, it's sort of a martial arts school, but it also seems to be like a criminal enterprise to me in this
Yes.
movie. It's more of like a criminal organization, and the father is killed early on, and David Chang plays a character called the Rover, who's sort of like a hired gun or a hired blade in this case, and he works with one of the underlings to help kill the father, and then Ti Lung ends up in hiding, and he has to come back and get revenge for his dad. He finds out that the Rover had very complicated reasons for why he killed the father, and in the end they end up working together to face an even bigger threat. I'm glossing over a lot of details because it's a very involved film, but this is probably, if not my favorite, it's one of my favorite movies that we're covering today. And I think you said something similar. I think you said it was your favorite movie. So, so what do you think of the film?
This is my favorite movie that we're covering today. I love all the twists and turns. It's not a very straightforward movie. You get little hints and pieces and glimpses, and then they explain everything at the end, and you don't see the ending coming. That's what I really, really like about this movie. If I can guess the end, I don't like it as much as if I'm hooked to the end, and then they have to tell me exactly what's going on, because I never saw the ending to this movie coming.
No, and there's no way to predict that ending. That ending is
not at all
unpredictable, in my opinion, unless you're really lucky. But I think that I love this should be called Knives and Blood. This movie, it's got so many great knife fights in it, and axes, and just again, it's similar to Vengeance in that it's that kind of very strenuous violence. Like, you can feel people like putting muscle into the attacks. It doesn't feel effortless, and the wounds feel real. It feels like they're part of a really dangerous world, and it's made very clear at the beginning of the movie. Like, there's a scene where Ti Lung is telling another guy in the middle of the fight that, I told you before, you need to aim your knife, higher, so that otherwise you're not going to kill the guy. And so these are clear. Like, I was thinking, like, normally normal people think that way about things like food. Like, when you're preparing the turkey, you got to do it this way so it doesn't get burned. And these guys are so immersed in this dangerous criminal world that they're spending their time thinking about how do you kill the guy in one quick cut, so that you can't pose a threat to you in the middle of the fight. So it's just I feel like this film creates a really believable world for the characters to live in, and you see it too. Like, even when characters are walking from one end of town to another, the way that people are all kind of moving away from them, and there's just
they're bad news just from that fact. There was so much going on in this movie. Again, we have Cao Feng in this movie, and you have mixed feelings about his character because you're not exactly sure. At the beginning, he's a good person. He's just one of the sons of the owners of this school, doing what he's supposed to do. And then when things start to get complicated, your mind changes. But then towards the middle of the movie, your mind changes yet again. So the characters in this movie are not very simple. They're very complicated, and their situations are complicated. they're so real and gritty, like you said about the other movie Vengeance. It's just real life happening. It's none of this surreal, fantastic kind of stuff. This is what really happens in the real world, and you get so sucked into it, trying to figure out who's doing what and why they're doing it until the very end. It just the I don't know. This was a genius movie for me, I thought. I love the complicated workings, and it's almost like playing games of chess or some kind of strategy game to figure out things, you know?
Yeah, no, and speaking of Ku Feng, 'cause you had mentioned, in this role he really is kind of an ambiguous character, and one of the things that's striking too is, you know, he has such versatility as an actor in these roles, and in this one in particular, you just really like if you're coming right off of like the new One Armed Swordsman and then watch this one, he could not be more different. And it's just. Yeah, I don't know. I really like I really like him as an actor, and he's somebody that he sometimes doesn't stand out quite as much as some of the other people who will be the stars of the movies, but he's a very reliable performer. And here I think he's used well, and also like you said, this one like definitely has like the brotherhood theme going on multiple levels, and it's also got there's the scene where Ti Lung goes back to his girlfriend who has been forced into prostitution because of everything that's going on, and they have to fight their way out of the building, and she ends up killing herself in order to help him get out. We're going to talk about another character like that in the Savage Five, I'm sure, but it's interesting because she's not a martial character, but it's the kind of noble sacrifice that you would expect from one of the main characters in these movies. And so yeah, I don't know. Any other thoughts on the film?
Yeah, there two interesting scenes that I thought at the very beginning were introduced to the Ti Lung's character, and he is in a tattoo parlor getting the tattoo of a butterfly, and it turns out that the girl that he's in love with that actually sacrifices herself for him they call her the butterfly. And I just thought it was interesting that they would start a movie like that, but that's real life. And then another interesting scene that I felt was when he finds the butterfly in the brothel being forced to prostitution. The argument that they had was so real and so emotional, and then he actually slaps her, and for me that scene was really hard to watch because I'm not used to seeing Ti Lung show violence toward a woman in any of the movies, so it was really hard to watch because it was so emotionally charged for me. But they make up and then they try to fight their way out of the building, and then just for her to give up the love of her life and die so that he could get away. But he doesn't get away, and in the next scene there's a whole bunch of torture, which brings us back to our themes of violence.
Yeah, that's something that I completely forgot. There is a lot of torture in a lot of in the Savage Five we get like them being whipped like horses, and in this one Ti Lung is put up on a spinning wheel and quite literally tortured. And there's a guy with like a blowtorch who's really sadistic and evil, who does get his sort of comeuppance. But yeah, it's again, these are very violent movies. That's sort of how they. It's just sort of it's practically the medium of the movie is almost violence. Do you know what I mean? Like it's it's so essential to just how the story is told. And I mean you really could almost summarize the movie, those knife sequences where you have the gritty knife fights that I'm talking about, where you can kind of hear the sounds that the knives are making when they're that sort of encapsulates the overall feel of the movie to me. That's sort of it's, I guess, unflinching would be kind of
Mm-hmm.
the language I would use, especially when I'm thinking like of the scene that you called out, where I think on the one hand that sort of stuff is hard to watch. On the other hand, he's not pulling his punches with the characters, and he's not, it's in some ways it's like you get to see a multi-dimensional character on screen because of that sort of thing, where they're not all painted as, okay, everything about this guy is great. Do you know what I mean? It adds a lot more complexity to the, and like you said, it's harder. It's a little bit difficult to stomach.
Yeah, I think that Chang Cheh was really great with creating complex characters, because the Ku Feng character in this movie is just so complex, and the Rover isn't just a simple killing machine. He is probably the most complex of them all. I mean, you never see his twist coming at the end. I don't know, this movie I think is the best of the five that we're going to talk about today. It's absolutely best.
And this movie does something else that's interesting too, which they also do in the Savage Five, but where there's a clear escalation of, like gun beats fist, like a knife beats fist, and gun beats knife, and we get the guns introduced at the end, kind of like the Fist of Fury situation in the Bruce Lee movie, and I think when you have guns that are definitive like that, where this isn't a movie where you can sort of magically overcome a gun with a fist,
Right.
I think it's it sort of works on screen, and in the Savage Five you will particularly see that at work. All right, so the next movie is The Savage Five, a 1973 film, and again, this is a Lau Kar Long Tong Kai action direction. And in this one, this is kind of almost a little bit like a Western. There's a town gets attacked by bandits, and the heroes are like these five guys that are either, lazy or down on their luck or just kind of on the lower rungs of society, and they all seem to hang out at this inn operated by this woman who we'll talk about. And the bandits come in with a safe, and they just need somebody to help them open up the safe, and things get out of hand really quickly. And this community that is, from the beginning of the movie, they establish this is a very peaceful community. The film opens up with David Chang stealing a chicken. He's a local thief, and they catch him, and they really don't want, like, they're really more friends with him than anything else. They don't want to punish him in any way that's harmful, and so he eventually suggests that they tie him to a tree. And so the town is so peaceful that when these bandits come, they don't really know how to handle it. And the central question of the movie seems to be, can they handle it and remain the same? So I don't know. What are your feelings on this movie?
I like this movie. This was another emotional movie for me. I guess 3 of the 5 had really drew on my emotional strings a lot. This movie is 5 very different guys. They have very different views on how to handle this situation. David Chang's character, like you said, is a local thief, but it ends up he's not just the local thief. He's more than he pretends to be. He's just hiding out in this small town. He decided to turn away from the murderous robbing ways that he had in the big city, and he's hiding in this town. And the townspeople get tired of him stealing their food, but he plays with the kids. Yeah. So they really don't want to do anything to, like, send him away. Then you have T Long, who is he's like a grumpy martial arts master who's really lazy, is what. Yes, he's being taken care of by the woman at the inn. And yeah, like you said, he's a master martial artist, but we don't know that at the beginning. We just know he's the master of something, but we don't know. And he had walked away from a fight at one time, and so that's kind of messed up his psyche a little bit. He thinks he's too good for manual labor.
Yeah.
Then we have Chen Quan Tai, who we know it has no. He is into manual labor. That's his job. He's the woodcutter in the town. He's the strong man that everybody looks up to. He's headstrong, and he just wants to go in and take over these 12 bandits. And then we have Wang Chung. He's an ailing acrobat who's sick, and he was just visiting the town, and he's not really able to fight at first. And Danny Lee Sao is the safe cracker who they think they're going to use to open the safe.
And but I think he's the nephew of the headman of the village, right?
Right. The unofficial mayor, I guess you would call him. And he runs off to the next town in order to try and get help, but unknowingly brings back more of the gang to the town. And so you have 5 different ways of how they want to handle this situation, and you wonder which one's going to work. And David Chang's character kind of appears to be a coward at the beginning, but once the bandits call him out because they recognize him, he has no choice but to show his martial skills. And it's just goes downhill really, really quickly when the safe opener does not return. They want to start killing off the village people for every inch that the shadow moves. So, yeah, they're really trying to figure it out, and they realize that they all just have to band together and try and take them down because there's more of them than there are of the bandits.
Yeah, and the Peking opera guy, the sick guy, is the one that kind of coaches them through the process and convinces them to really resort to violence. But it's this is probably my favorite, I think, out of all. I mean, it's very difficult. There's a lot of them are contenders for the number 1 slot for me. But I think this is the one that I enjoy the most. And I think the reason is you feel trapped in that town with those people. I really felt like I was in peril watching this movie. You know, it's like it just did a really good job. Number 1 of establishing the community and giving it this character that you didn't want it to lose, which is it's this peaceful, nice place. And it seemed like the more they moved into violent confrontation with the bandits, which was obviously becoming a necessity, the more that they also stood to lose in some ways. And I think that's why the headman was so reluctant to give the people knives. I think it was more than just will they even be able to succeed, but will they still be the same people when they're done?
This definitely the bandits signaled the loss of innocence for this town. No, you can't go back to the way things were once something like this happens to you. Obviously, this town wasn't used to anyone dying unless it was some kind of natural death. You could tell that just from how peaceful it was. And one of the characters said, yeah, we have knives, but we know how to use them. You know, I think that they knew that if they actually went and killed the bandits, that their innocence was gone forever and nothing would ever be the same.
Well, and in this one too, you had the like the scene you mentioned where the safecracker goes to the yamen and he accidentally brings back more bandits. Prior to that, the characters eventually do rise up against there's like 12 bandits, and throughout the whole movie it's like, you know, people keep saying there's only 12 bandits and 100 people in the town, why we just give them knives and we'll, you know, we can and so they eventually do that. They eventually all kind of rise up, you know, because of the sacrifice made by the Chen Quang Tai character, the woodcutter. But then right after they succeed, the safecracker brings in the other bandits who have guns, and you know, no amount of knives are going to stop, you know, and it's very sort of like right out of a spaghetti western or something. The guy's got like he's got bullets strapped over his chest, and he's got 2 guns, and he's even got like he just feels like he comes from another genre almost. But I like that escalation, that sort of, you know, knife beats fist, gun beats knife sort of thing that's going on in the movie, where the characters, even the martial characters, against a knife, they really can't do anything unless they have a knife. Do you know what I mean? And then against a gun, even if they have a knife, they really can't do anything. And it's just a very realistic approach to violence in this kind of movie, where you can't just sort of with some fancy moves get around that. The threats have realistic weight to them, so much so that the thief ends up stealing the bullets from the bandit leader, and they end up using that in their as part of their overall tactic for defeating the bandits in the end. But there's also the the Wu Bingbing character, San Yang, the woman who I don't know if it's an inn or if she's just letting them stay at her house. But and again, this is a graphic thing that if people are troubled by sexual violence stuff might want to pause. But her character makes a sacrifice quite similar to the other character we were talking about from the duel, where the bandits are basically about to rape all the women in the village, and she takes that threat on herself, and the consequences of that are pretty profound for her character. But it was a very sort of striking sacrifice, because basically all of the other women in the village don't have to undergo that as a result of her taking that step. But I thought that she was one of the more interesting characters in the movie.
I thought so too. Especially the scene where she's just standing there staring at Chen Quan Tai's character's body, the woodcutter, and she doesn't let anybody touch him. And then she just continues to stare as things keep happening. And every time a new one of the other four men comes, she's like, don't touch him. It's like she's become numb from this sexual abuse, but so protective of his body. And it was just so striking and so sad and so emotional.
Well, and I think she was like almost functioning as like a metaphor for the community itself. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's what was going on there. And so I don't know. But this film, I think it's like very, I don't know. You just really feel the peril of the community, and it's a violent movie like all the other ones we're talking about, but it's not a violent movie where you're enjoying the violence as much. Do you know what I mean? Like in the other movies, even though it's gritty, it's still very entertaining. Here, it feels like everybody's like a moment away from dying, just one wrong move, and they're like T Lung's character in this movie, even though he's like the number one kung fu guy in the town next to the Chen Quan Tai guy, he's not nearly anything like he is in the other films. He doesn't have. He's still just a normal guy at the end of the day who could, if you stab him in the chest once, he's gonna die, and it doesn't take much to take people out in this film. It's not, people still die glorious deaths, but it's just not like it was in the other movies. I think there's something a little bit more, unnerving about it.
I think what was unnerving for me was the fact that in the other movies, Vengeance and The Duel, the death was graphic, but bloody.
Yeah.
And so that kind of added some kind of like surreal, kind of detached way about it. But this one, there was hardly any blood in the movie, but you felt more in danger, like you said. Like, you were in the middle of it and watching everybody, and you're kind of feeling like I could be next.
Yeah.
Because you're placed directly in the center of it. And I don't know how he managed to do that, but Chang Cheh sucked you in so far that you're pretty much, whenever the townspeople are standing around, you're one of those townspeople looking on, wondering what's going to happen to our town. And you're so involved in and invested in what's going to happen that it does feel like you could be the next person to die, and with the lack of blood, I think sometimes all the blood just makes it seem less real.
Yeah, it's like paint. It's almost like it's
Right.
like it's
Because you can see it and
yeah.
you can tell that the blood is fake, but there was so little blood that, it was just really unnerving.
It was like people were really dead. Is kind of like it wasn't as spectacular. There wasn't as much extravagance around the individual deaths. They were just like kind of like you might expect a real death to be, and it just, and also I think that opening shot had a lot to do with it too, because they have the scene where David Chang's being chased through the town. They pan out and you can see all the streets and stuff, and they don't do that a lot in these movies. Like some movies they do, but this was like oh, I know what this town looks like. Do you know what I mean? Like I can see it from I really have a clear mental image of the community, and I felt like that just gave it a sense of geography. And also the fact that you knew it took him 3 days to get to the Yamen. Like something about that, you felt so isolated. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like,
right.
Wow, it took him, just for him to get back, just to get a little bit of the way there and make the mistake and bring those guys there took him all that time, like almost the whole movie. And so you just had this like, wow, it's really, they really don't have anybody they can go to now. So it's just all it just worked in that respect. But yeah, I don't know hopefully we didn't forget anything. Is there any other detail? Oh, the ending.
Oh, it's yes. That's so sad. Just the scene of, well, obviously 4 of the 5 do not survive. The only person who lives is the ailing acrobat. And well, he's totally healed and everything, but you see them bringing out the bodies of our four of our heroes, and that's just devastating when even the good guys don't live, and they're the ones that lived in the town and had the biggest stake in the town, and yet they didn't survive. And then, the acrobat who's just visiting ends up, having to go on his way. But just this, to see the procession of them carrying them out for burial, and they're not in coffins either. Yeah. So that's even more striking because you get to see their faces as they're being carried out.
Well, also the acrobat, I think he kind of leaves in a way that's a little bit rude. He's the one that encouraged them to do this, and then that woman is the the woman who basically nursed him to health is totally shattered. And he just kind of picks up his stuff and leaves, right? And I know it's all kind of done, it's condensed because we need that ending vision of this is the funeral, this is him departing, and this is her standing there sad. And it's maybe not meant to be so literal, but I just have a, I kind of feel like he just, he's kind of the outsider that they pegged him for at the start of the movie. Do you know what I mean? Where
right.
He's just on to the next place, and for all his words about rising up, he didn't really stick around for the consequences, it seems, at the end. But again, expediency of the ending of the movie. So, I might be reading too much into it.
Yeah, I just thought, he really didn't have a stake in the town, but he'd gathered or gained this bond with these other 4 men. You think he would have stuck around just a little bit longer. When I first watched it, I was expecting him to stick around and help rebuild this town and maybe help put these people back together and back to some sort of normalcy, to forget being an acrobat, just leave his things and stay in the town. But You're right. He just packs up and leaves.
It was just a little bit perplexing because throughout the movie he was kind of depicted as a pretty compassionate guy. I thought there wasn't any, like when she came back from that scene and sat down, he would clearly felt for her. He wasn't, he clearly had compassionate impulses over the course of the whole movie. So like I say, it's probably more expediency than anything else, but because of the way it's done, it feels very cold to have him just kind of get up and leave, and especially when she's kind of left there. But yeah, so I don't know, but I think it's a very a very good movie. I think I would highly recommend this one. So those are the 5 movies. Were there any that you think were questionable additions to the list, or ones that we would have to justify that maybe didn't quite qualify as an Iron Triangle movie?
I would say probably the Savage Five is on the line
Mm.
because you do have more of an ensemble. There you bring in Chen Quan Tai as I guess the fourth leg of the triangle, which would make it a quadrilateral.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that I would agree. This one it definitely has more of an ensemble feel to it.
Yes,
And I
all
think
those characters were so integral and so important to the movie. I think that the Savage Five is definitely more of an ensemble than the triangle, but I like it as a triangle film.
yeah, I mean, I think it's such a good movie. I feel like, but if we were doing strictly Iron Triangle, we might have done like Duel of Fists, the Muay Thai film, or Angry Guest or something in there. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but yeah. So I don't know, any closing thoughts on the topic? Anything that we didn't cover that we should say before we go?
Just that these aren't necessarily these aren't the only movies. There are a lot of other movies out there that we could have done, and Brendan just mentioned a couple of them. But definitely check out the Iron Triangle. They're very classic type movies. They really um, embody the sense of brotherhood between characters. There's a lot of complexity. It's not like some people think that these martial arts movies, they wrote the scripts as they went, but that's strictly not true, especially in these series of movies. Everything is all set out so well. Everything's developed, the storylines and the characters, and they really do draw you in. And once I started watching an Iron Triangle film, I spent a whole entire summer just trying to dig in and find as many as I could. And luckily, Amazon Prime was just starting to release them, and I was able to watch a whole bunch of them on Amazon Prime. But they're really, really good movies. There's not one that I would say don't watch. But if you could ever see an Iron Triangle film, go check them out, because Chang Cheh was such a brilliant director, and the talent that he found and put together in these teams was just so wonderful and so brilliant that there's no mistaking why he is the godfather of these movies. I mean, he's the bar, and he set it high. And I believe in most cases, he was way ahead of his time in these films. So definitely check out the Iron Triangle movies.
Yeah, I mean and it's a really I guess you could say like an important phase too in his career. Like there's definitely distinct periods, and this is one of them. But yeah, and also I think it's a I think the chemistry between David Chang and T Long it works really well. I particularly like T Lung, but David Chang's a very good actor as well, and together they just really have a I don't know, they just something about them together on screen is it just makes it's one of the things that makes these films work. It's kind of like the Venom mob in that way. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's like you have a group of
Yes.
actors who just work together in a very different sense, but like in this one, a lot of it is just the chemistry. And so and again, I mentioned the Duel of Fists. I really like that one, and we didn't include it on the list for a variety of reasons. But I would definitely suggest people check that one out if they want to see one that we didn't mention. And I don't know if you have any that you would point people to, or but
Angry Guest. I like the Angry
Angry
Guest
Guest.
too. They go together, the Angry Guest and the Duel of Fists. And I like how sometimes Chang Cheh will give himself a cameo in his movies.
His Angry Guest cameo is wonderful. I think it's a really good cameo. So yeah, so all right, so we're gonna head out, and we'll be back on Friday with another film. We're I think we're doing Ashes of Time. Is that our next movie for Wuxia Weekend? Or am I
I think
mistaken?
so.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I think we're doing Ashes of Time. A little bit artsy, but we'll see what everybody thinks. And then we're gonna continue with the '90s theme that we have for the month, and then we'll do our spirited beasts and ghosts theme the following month. So again, this has been an Iron Triangle discussion. We highlighted 5 Iron Triangle films, and I think are most of these available on Prime, or are these
They're all available
they're all
on
okay. So
Prime.
these are all ones. If you have Amazon Prime, you can go watch them right now. And definitely, I think one of the cool things about Amazon Prime is the sheer number of Shaw Brothers films that it has right now, and martial arts films in general. But you never know when they're going to go away. So if you're interested in any of the 5 movies we mentioned, I would try to check it out as quickly as possible because you don't know how long they're going to be up there. And I guess until then, we'll talk to you later.